Religion has profoundly influenced the sweeping American narrative, perhaps more than any other force in our history, from the time of the indigenous peoples to the present day. The National Museum of American Religion tells the surprising and compelling story of what religion has done to America and what America has done to religion, including the establishment of the revolutionary and indispensable idea of religious freedom as a governing principle in the U.S., inviting all to explore the role of religion in shaping the social, political, economic, and cultural lives of Americans, and thus America itself. Join us for Season 3 of our podcast series, Religion and the American Experience, as we follow scholars and others deep into America's religious history and learn how it can inform and animate us as citizens grappling with complex questions of governance and American purpose in the 21st century. Episodes will be released monthly on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Listeners, welcome to another episode of The Making of Us, Lived Religion in America, a subseries of the podcast Religion and the American Experience. In this subseries, we explore the role that religion has played in the lives of everyday Americans, reminding us that while religion exerts a significant influence on the events and movements of the American project, religion's primary work and where it has the most influence is in the everyday lives of adherents. Today, Arshan Khalid of Washington, D.C. joins us to tell his own religious history. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me, Chris. Wonderful to be here.
Arshan, please tell our listeners a little about yourself, leaving out anything religious, as we will get to that later. Help our listeners get to know who you are.
I'm Arshan Khalid, and I live in Washington, D.C., and I recently moved to Washington, D.C. from Chicago, and I worked for the Islamic Society of North America. I direct their Washington, D.C. Office of Interfaith, Government Relations, and Community Alliances. And I studied development economics for my undergrad, and then international relations, and then I switched over to theology and did a divinity degree from the University of Chicago a few years back. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. That'll help us out a little bit as we get to understand and know your religious history. So describe for us, Arshan, who your parents and grandparents were religiously. What are their religious histories?
Yeah, my family comes from India, and my grandparents and my parents, I would say, we had two sets of family groups. My mother's side, I would say, was probably more religious. My grandfather was, I think, amongst the state he comes from in India, I think one of the first Muslim doctors in that region. I would say he was probably much more of a pragmatist in terms of his religious relationship. My mother's side was probably much more religious. My parents, I think, as was the case for my grandfather, I think as time, my mother, I would say, was much more religious. So she always had a connection to spirituality and faith. And I think my father, I would say, again, is an engineer with a scientific brain. I think over time, he became more and more religious, and it took similarly to my grandfather. And I think, but there was a progression of growing religiosity I saw over the years as I was growing up. Yeah.
Okay. And where did you grow up?
So I grew up I was born in India, and then I grew up lived in a compound, an American compound in Saudi Arabia. My father worked for the oil company there and lived in a Truman Show-like compound in Saudi Arabia. And then I also lived in Bahrain went to boarding school there, actually, at the Bahrain American School. And then I moved to Boston when I was 17 or 18.
Okay. And did you know and interact with your grandparents often? Were they part of your life?
Yeah, absolutely. My grandfather from my mother's side had passed away before I was born. But my father's side and we were very close, and we visited them every chance we got. Sometimes twice a year, or even 3 times a year. So yeah, we were close. We were very close.
Okay. So tell us how religion influenced you as you grew up during what we would call our elementary school years, so early years. What was the role of religion in your home, in your parents' life, and then in yours?
Yeah, elementary school years, I would say, growing up in India as a young Muslim kid, my father, usually, I think I had a distinct imagination of it, where my mother lives, where my mom's family lives. Most of my cousins, my extended family, they all live together. And in India, if you go to Delhi and other places, there are what they call Muslim areas, and then cities are not cordoned off, but there are enclaves that have existed for a long time, or neighborhoods that are known to be Mughal food would be there, or things like that. So my cousins and my extended family, I would say from my mom's side, they had that. But my dad worked in oil, so we moved a lot. And I, I think I grew up in the schools that I went to. I think one of the schools that I went to, I was probably the only Muslim kid there. And so I've always had I had a very great relationship. I think I would say I would have had a good relationship with everybody, but that was always I imagined it. It was very stark growing up in India, knowing that I was the only Muslim kid, and I didn't understand it probably as a young when I was that young, but I knew that I was that I was I was that I was I was the only person from that religious community in those schools, and so I just remembered that as a memory. But as a kid, I didn't. It wasn't ever my parents never talked about it. I didn't see that my parents had friends, mostly my dad's work friends, so on and so forth, and so I don't think I had a religious identity probably, at least until, I would even say at least until high school, if not until I came to Boston for college. Yeah.
So when you were in those elementary school years, you were in India. When did you leave India?
I left India
with your family when he was assigned somewhere else to work, right?
Yeah. So I left India when I was 12, I believe.
Okay. Yeah. So you're suggesting your family was not very religious, is that right then?
Yeah, definitely. I think we attended Friday prayers. We somewhat, I think, but and then we went to Eid prayers. I think they were culturally religious, but in terms of daily practice or that being a major part of the identity, that wasn't. I think that was part of the upbringing. Yeah.
And was that similar for your mom and dad when they were growing up? Were they also just sort of culturally Muslim?
I think definitely for my dad. My mom grew up in a much more religious family, I would say. My dad grew up in less so. I think they were, where he comes from. His siblings and him were very, very successful, or very successful in the scientific fields. So my aunt was one of the first electrical engineers that came out of that state, and was one of the heads of one of the universities happened to be. So those type of things like made it like I think they had much more connection to, they had much more focus on that, and I would say probably less religious. Yeah.
Okay. But you did go to Friday prayers growing up, is that right?
Yeah. I mean, not regularly. I would say I don't remember going up until probably like middle school. I would say. Yeah.
Okay. So in those early years, as you say, not a strong religious identity. Now let's move into your middle school years. Your family has then left India.
Yeah.
They've gone to Saudi Arabia, right? And you're going to, I think you said an American middle school.
Yeah, exactly.
Can you describe your religious life at that point? Did it change at all, or was it different in any way?
I think I think I would say it changed much more for my parents being in Saudi Arabia. I think they felt that they were closer to Mecca and Medina. And so then there was this like desire to go to Mecca, Medina regularly, wanting to go and explore that, like the fact that they were in Saudi Arabia, and then it was a big step for them. I think for me, I think I definitely, I mean, I was definitely like moved, and I wanted to go. And I mean, I think experiencing the first time going to Mecca was a huge deal felt like a huge moment for me. But in terms of like middle school, I mean, it was like it was an American middle school. It's very diverse. People in my class, I think every classmate I had was from a different country.
Right.
Yeah, and so like my sister, she had because most of her friends were from Colombia and Venezuela, and so she had when she was 16, she had her first she had her quinceañera.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so it was very diverse in that way, and I don't think a religious aspect yet had like entered, but I do remember that trip to Mecca having an impact on me. And but that was like felt like it felt unknown to me, and it felt like, oh God, there's got to be there's something bigger than I realized going, or something unknown here. And I remember that being in my memory. Yeah.
So you have one sibling?
Yeah.
A sister. So you saw your parents sort of become more religious. They were in Saudi Arabia. They felt a pull towards Islam, towards Mecca. What are your memories of that observation? And I want to get into your trip to Mecca and what that did to you a little bit more. But did anything change around the house as far as religiosity? Did you go to Friday prayers more often? Did you go to the mosque more often? What did that look like?
Yeah, I think Friday prayer, we went, given that we were living in Saudi Arabia, I think my dad, that was the first time I remember we started going every week.
Okay.
So and I saw that like shift in them. And I saw that they wanted to become more religious, per se. But overall, I wouldn't say like a major shift. I think it was Friday prayer that became a big part. But we were like in like a very diverse environment.
And so tell us about that trip to Mecca. How old were you? And a few more details, what that did. Oh, and then we'll move on to high school.
So the trip to Mecca, I would say the trip to Mecca was when I was 13. And I think I remember we actually like took a bus there all the way from the east coast of Saudi Arabia. There was like a community-led trip going.
Right.
And I remember like on the trip, the bus broke down in the middle of the desert. And I remember getting out and then in the desert, like seeing the stars. And I remember that having a really profound impact, like just being able to see that. And then going to Mecca, I think was the first time was, quite surreal. Just the act of like everybody gathered together, um, without and I think a lot of it was like societal for me, if that makes sense.
Yes.
That like, people had to let go of there were like you knew nobody's social status in that environment, and everybody was wearing um, the towel that everybody wears, and uh, that moment was, I think it stuck with me. I don't think it registered for me, but it did. There was some registration. I remember historically, like, I remember seeing um, the Kaaba for the first time, and I remember that memory very distinctly. And I think that was like, I think it was like a first realization for me that like, that like all of these people believe, or there was something unknown to me, and that like I have like perhaps I will explore it some.
Right. Okay. What year was that?
That was 2007, 6.
Okay. And did it affect your sister as well? In the same
No,
way? No. Okay.
not in the same way. I think she remembers, but it was like I think we had like, yeah, I think she remembers it, uh, but I don't think it was like it was important for her. But I think for me it was like, holy moly, like there is a whole world here that maybe I'll get to explore someday, or
Right.
get to know about. Yeah.
You said something insightful about your home as an elementary school aged child, and that was that your parents didn't talk about religion in the home. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Did that change when they moved to Saudi Arabia? Did they start to talk more about it, or was it just the weekly Friday prayers that changed and the trip to Mecca?
No, yeah, they didn't talk about religion even out there. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no.
Okay, so let's move from middle school into high school. What happened then religiously? And did you move? I think you moved somewhere else. Was that about high school age, or tell us about that?
Yeah, so I moved for high school, I went to boarding school.
Okay.
About when I was probably 14, 15, I left. And I lived in a boarding school which was connected to the American Navy base in Bahrain. And yeah, and so I lived in a boarding school for about like 3 years, 2 years. And I think that's where my religious like experience like began personally, and that's where I wanted to explore it. I would say, the boarding school, the school there was, very. Most of the kids there were like either children of ambassadors. Some kids were from the royal family there. Most of I believe the crown prince, the current crown prince, his son, they both went to that school in Bahrain. And it was an environment, so my father's company was paying for the boarding school. But it was a world that like I had come across, but I guess not necessarily a part of directly. And all of a sudden, there was like you were a part of this like world, if that makes sense. And I think, and so I think I'd always had it in me where I had felt like after moving to Saudi Arabia, especially, and then my dad, I believe that like his income had probably increased significantly. And then I had always felt like once we moved there, I had always felt this sort of like guilt, almost, I would say, that like we had left behind like I think India was deeply in my memory, and just knowing how people, just day to day, like how people live there on the streets, and and so I had always this like conundrum, I would say, within me from like the beginning, if that makes sense. And I knew, like, my extended family, my cousins, like knowing that like my extended family, some of them are probably struggling financially and so on and so forth. And then it never like, I never internalized it, if that makes sense. Like I never like, it was always like there's a rationalization that one can do with that, but that rationalization didn't happen for me. And so there was always this like conundrum. I felt guilty. I felt like bad. So I think when I was in that boarding school, I was friends with many of the kids, of course, that were there. And I felt that there was this like, because I was part of this boarding school, my father worked for this company, and so this I'd become a part of some strata of society. And then like I knew that like most of the people that were like working class, like people who were the laborers in the country, and others were mostly from Indian and Pakistani and South Asian backgrounds. And in a way, I had been accepted into this world, per se. And I think that really ate at me over time. And I felt the sort of like guilt, I would say, that like I probably felt that they weren't, and that was in my consciousness from probably a young age, but I probably felt they weren't treated in the best way that they could be treated always. And I think like it felt to me that like there's got to be something, like this can't be it, in terms of like life. Like this is
okay.
Right. Yeah. And so I think the most significant moment for me was, and we've talked about this before, like going to the mosque. And there's one big mosque in Bahrain. And similarly to the experience of Mecca, and I think that was already somewhere in the back of my mind. But going to that mosque in Mecca, in Bahrain, and seeing the people who were laborers and working class walking in 120 degrees Fahrenheit to the mosque, and then like princes and like other people with them praying together without like any shoes, without any, that like there was this like I felt like I watched it in like like third person that happening. And then I was like, oh my God, like at some moment, that was my first time going to Friday prayer on my own. And I was like, oh my God, like there's like from like a third person perspective, like, oh God, like they're all the same here. Like all of them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And yeah, and so then I think a religious exploration, desire for religious exploration, like became stronger. Yeah.
That's a very moving story. Thank you for sharing such a personal story there. This sounds like it was early on in your time at the boarding school, somewhat, right? Where you went to Friday prayers and you had that sort of experience. How did that change your sort of daily life? Did it change you religiously in terms of what you did every day?
No, not yet. I wouldn't say yet. I think this was like about early junior year. not right away. I think I had that registration, and then I think I had decided that I wanted to move away from like that part of the world, or even away from like my father's I wanted to start like kind of like on my own, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Without being connected to like, over there, which family you come from and community you come from, all of those things registered. Like I wanted to start a little bit like, I would say from like the ground up, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so I knew I wanted to go away. And I think America was like, to go to America was like a very important step for me, if that makes sense.
And so two questions. You were not then what one would consider a religious person at this point, even, I mean, you didn't, prayer 5 times a day, all the different religious sort of behaviors of a Muslim, these were not part of your life, or some of them were becoming part, or still sort of far away from that? Help our listeners understand that.
Yeah. So I would say about like, how do I say, like about like, I was starting to try to pray maybe 2 times, 3 times potentially, but not regularly. No, they weren't a part until I probably got to Boston. Yeah.
Okay. So now we're moving out of high school. You felt like you needed to go away. America seemed to be the place where you need to go. Part of that sounds like it was some part of your religious quest was pointing you there. If that is that a fair thing?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about that. Why America became part of your religious quest, and then bring us into your university years. You moved to the United States. Tell us a little bit about why that, as I asked, was what you did in your religious journey, and then what happened there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I would say like America was part of my. Yeah, I think that strata thing that I talked about. You know, I remember in high school, I'd begun to read a lot by junior year, senior year. And I had read through Muhammad Ali, so a few of his books by that time, or a few writings on him. And then, like, I think I imagined one of the main things for me in America was that, of course, there is like inequality everywhere in the world, right? But in America, the social like kind of like strata system that had been created, that has over time got created in the old world, I would say, didn't exist in America in the same way. That it was very hard. It's very hard in that part of the world for somebody who's from a certain societal background to go and have like coffee with somebody from, I don't know, somebody who's from a working class background. And that had always eaten at me. Like, why is that? And why is that not possible? Right? That like, there's certain like, why does that, like, what? And it's very stark in certain parts of the world, those type of things. I felt that America was one of the only places where that wasn't like present, right? That like you could say, I don't know, you can go to like if you, just to give an example, like if you love Star Wars, you didn't need to be from a certain like, you didn't, it didn't, like your love Star Wars didn't belong to like a certain societal group or a certain like wealth status or certain like and I think that possibility that like you can that didn't exist. And of course, I'm not denying that like America is working. We're working. It's a work in progress, and we're working on things. But that opportunity existed, and I think for me that was like later on I would understand that for me I connected that to the inception of America itself. That what was this idea of like leaving behind aristocracy and leaving behind feudal systems, but that would come later. But I knew that from like the beginning, that like that's what I felt was like made it for me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. And so tell us about your religious experiences as a college student.
Yeah.
How were religious ideals influencing you during that stage in your life?
Yeah. So I would say in the beginning, so as soon as I landed, I would say I was like I would say like wings got attached in terms of like I felt a certain freedom that I guess comes with America. And I wanted to like learn everything. If I was reading probably 8 hours a day, I probably went through like Aristotle, Plato, like all of Greek philosophy. Then I went through like probably all of like I don't know, like Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations, economics. Like I read a lot, and Boston created that environment too because everybody else over there was seemed like they were. I thought that that's how you live in Boston, and so I just like I read a lot, and I think, and I was exploring. I was exploring like, but it wasn't like reading for the sake of reading. I was like searching. I certainly was searching for something, and I did a year of engineering because I promised my dad that I was doing engineering, and then I'd always intended to drop out, but I did 1 year for him, and so then I dropped out of engineering after my first year, and switched to development economics. And that, I thought by doing development economics, that's how I can give back to that strata thing that I was talking about. Yeah. And so, but I was reading, and then I got more and more. I wanted to work for like try to work for the UN, try to work like lift up like like countries, like find ways to like lift up countries in sub-Saharan Africa or India, or like help find tools to develop those things. I think at a certain point in that, I realized that like a lot of that, like wanting to do humanitarian work and wanting to do development work and then wanting to read in the way I was reading, was because I was searching for something. I felt, and I think I pushed towards doing all of that to try to find like perhaps there's an answer behind all of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I would say that I think it wasn't until I came across, I would say, this Muslim scholar, his book, more towards leaning towards like, I would say, his name was Ghazali, and I came across Rumi too at that same time. But when I read a book called The Alchemy of Happiness by Ghazali, I think there was a part of it where it talked about how like you can like live your life dedicated to God, and that like somehow like what he was saying essentially was like the only life worth living is like in consciousness, or a life which is dedicated to God no matter what you're doing, something along those lines.
Right.
And I was like, oh, and it was a very simple line, but it like really like stopped me in my tracks. um, and it was kind of like, I almost felt, and Ghazali holds that position in the Muslim world, that like he had written refutation of Greek philosophy in the same way Aquinas had written, or Augustine had written a refutation of Greek philosophy. I would say Aquinas had written a refutation of Greek philosophy. And I think I'd been reading all of that quite a bit at that time. And it felt to me like it challenged me in a way. And also that I didn't have an answer after I had read that like one statement. And in the Ghazalian story, he's giving a speech to, he was the head of one of the greatest universities in the Islamic Golden Age, the Baghdad University, when Baghdad was in the 12th century or the 11th century. And one day at the age of 28, he was the head, and then like as he was speaking, he got up and he said, "I can't teach anymore," and he didn't say a word. And then he wrote about it later in his books, but he left, and he said, like, I felt like arrogance had like entered my heart, and I wasn't teaching anymore for the pleasure of something bigger. I was teaching because I was deriving like pleasure or pride from it. And I had read that in Augustine as well, because Saint Augustine had that moment in the Confessions as well, where he says like, where he confesses to God that like he had approached this knowledge for not the sake of knowledge, but something else.
Right.
But that, like reading that, and then that line from Ghazali, like really stumped me. And I was like, oh God, like I have to like figure something out. And so initially it was really hard, because I felt like, I have a curious I have a curious mind, I would say, and I'm not gonna like. It's really hard for me to like leave something like unresolved, if that makes sense. And so like that unresolvedness, like really like it bothered me. And I was like, I mean, it was very humbling probably over time, but it was like I really didn't have an answer. And I was like, oh my God, I'm stumped here. And then you read like further like Rumi and others, and I read more Ghazali books, and read more on I would say then like progressed towards like the Emerson and the transcendentalist movement, Emerson and Thoreau, and that like this like there's this whole world of like unknowns that they're working with, and I think, and then Thomas Merton with like his moment, and so I started like I went from like I think like very strict like readings on economics and Plato and Aristotle and all of that to like, oh my God, there's this whole world of people. And then I'd read through like Charles Taylor and Alasdair MacIntyre talking about like Western, and then I was like, okay, like, but these, whatever that is, like, I get it in a certain sense, but whatever this is, I have no idea what's going on. Like, and not in the sense that I wasn't like legibly understanding what they were saying, but I was, they're talking about a world that, oh my God, like, what is this like? And so yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's really a fascinating story of you there in Boston. Now, so how did this translate into your personal religious life changing, and include, if you will, any interactions with your family along these years as you were changing religiously?
Yeah. So then I started like, okay, like I was like, it was like a Malcolm Xian moment where he like, like Malcolm used to say that like the hardest thing was for me was getting on my knees to pray because it reminded me how like weak as human beings we are. Um, and I think for me it was like a similar something. I felt that the only answer I'm going to get. Um, I'm not similar to Malcolm. I wouldn't say that. I didn't have a hard time getting on my like knees in that way. I would say, um, but I had like I felt the only answer I would get that I needed to go explore this religious like realm more and more to be able to like get the answer I'm looking for. And so I started praying more. I started praying regularly. I saw, and at this point, I was like, I would say I was like, I always felt like I was like lacking in terms of like religiosity compared to other Muslims, and I had this like guilt. uh, but by the time I started getting acquainted with like this is probably just it's not a long time. This is freshman year, I would say. Um, I you know I was reading a ton. I read through all of like prophetic biography, several. um, and yeah, I started becoming more and more religious, I would say. I prayed a lot. But it was like, my prayer was like, it wasn't like, I wouldn't say it was religious, of course, but it was also like it felt to me that like whatever answer I'm looking for in this way, I felt like this is the only like perhaps this is the only way I'm going to be able to find it, right? Like yeah, and it was like and like things like the Moses parable of like take off your shoes before you enter, and it was like if I am and I think I needed to like that's what it felt like. I think I needed to explore that realm. Right. Yeah, my parents, I would say, my family, they had a hard time. There was a sudden shift. I was like, initially I used to come home, but like I used to come back home with like 10 books on like from Adam Smith to like, my dad was very like, like proud and impressed. Like there was always 10 books in most of my bag when I went home was books. And then there was clothes on like pair of clothing. um, but then, then the book started changing and a lot of them were like very like no, I wouldn't say like I wanted to know, like my hope was to know, like I wanted to know as much and as possible, and so like I tried to like touch every every corner of like religious understanding, and so I had tens of books and that I was reading at the same time probably. And I think my parents probably were like, I think they were like they were concerned in the sense that like nobody in our family had been that religious, or even amongst my extended family.
Right.
And they thought I would become very religious. But I think part of what the difference was I was trying to explain to them was like this is not just like religiosity to me. This is also about like I'm doing this for like I want to learn this and I want to know it for what it is, not like in the sense of like something like that, if that makes sense.
It does. It does. So were you looking at all sorts of faiths? I mean, as you had the strong desire to figure out the religious question, right, for you,
yeah,
put it that way, I guess, were you exploring other faiths, or were you comfortable in your Islamic roots and you were going to stay there and figure that out? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think first I had to figure out the Islamic, um, like kind of like my Islamic root slash like is, I mean, and this included like, I mean, I read through like most of like Islamic Golden Age, like it didn't, I was reading through like Avicenna, and it wasn't just like I was reading, like I wanted to know like kind of like I was trying to like get to know all of it, not all of it, but just the whole, what is it that like what is it that the religious expression produces in the world in its finest, or
Right.
what is, yeah, what is the in terms of the other religion. But I think I would say that like my I always felt like I always was drawn to the stories of the prophets, and like even then, and even with me reading, and so like even with me reading like all of this, like trying to like read through this rational arguments and this and that, or proving these things wrong and right and this and that. But I was like, but like my exploration of it also had this like, and this was important for me, and this is where I think I feel like it's most important for me. It's like my exploration had like a very simple edge to it too, or had a simple like exploration to it. I mean, I was reading through like the stories of the prophets, and I had a deep respect slash value for the messengers, the different messengers, or the prophets. And I remember even then, I saw each religion as a distinct um, arm of that, like religions adopt the qualities, or religions adopt the qualities of the prophet that is most connected to them. And so then like, and I always viewed it as that like, and and so then that really stuck with me, I would say. Um, in terms of exploring other religions, I think my quest in it was more so, I would say, more so than like religion. I think I wanted to like get to like I wanted to understand it in a way, with religion, of course, but like I wanted to understand it in a way where like from that beginning, that like there's got to be something that like transcends it all, the divisions, the different criteria, or the different like communities, that there's some like binding principle. and and I think I would say that was my like quest, and my exploration of, probably, I mean, of course, Islamically I kept going deeper and deeper, but I would say like I was still looking for the thing that like what is, the music that plays in each, if that makes sense.
Right.
And that like, and I say then I began to explore other religions the closer I felt like I got to that, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yes, it does. Okay. Okay. Well, this has been super fascinating. Last two questions.
Yeah.
Bring us up to today. Who are you religiously today? What defines your religiosity and your religious life?
Yeah. So who am I religiously today? I would say, yeah, I am like, I think this has been years since those days. I studied Islam extensively after that, and I studied jurisprudence and all of the things that I guess I needed to have to be at least considered advanced, or very like advanced, or very advanced student of Islamic studies. Um, I I think and I did much of this overseas in Jordan and Egypt and Turkey for 2.5 years. But I think one of the things that happened to me was um, when I started studying Islam like very deeply, extensively, Islamic studies extensively. I think part of it was, and I think I realized that a lot of my connection as I became religious, even though I grew up in Saudi Arabia or whatever parts of my life there, that like I became religious in America. And somehow like that American identity of what I was saying earlier about like leaving behind aristocracies, feudal systems, whatever that is, or like creating we bear these truths to be self-evident that all men and women are created equal. Or, like part of my like journey became intertwined with that like Emersonian slash, Springsteen, Dylan, right? And Dylan has this thing about Guthrie that he says where it's like you can find in his ode to Guthrie, he says you can find God, or in his Dylan, I don't entirely agree with the way he says it, but in his Dylan-esque, or probably sarcasm, but he says you can find God in a church or a temple or a mosque, or what like you can find God in a space of your choice. And you can find Guthrie at the Brooklyn. You can find Guthrie at the Brooklyn Children's Hospital. But I assure you that you will find both at sundown, at sunset, looking over the sun at the Grand Canyon. and I think whatchamacallit, like, how do I say? I think that part is really important for me. That like, how do I say it? I think I see my religious identity today very much like intertwined with that. That like God is in like God is in the little places with the simple things. At the hospital with the everyday people, and I think a lot of my religiosity is connected to that. And yeah, and I think that is an important part for me. And I think part of that also is like connected to my like love for what America is, in terms of like, Emma Lazarus's words in on the Statue of Liberty, like give me your poor, give me your tired, give me your homeless, give me your you know um, I think a lot of my religious identity somehow in some ways is intertwined with that, I would say. And in terms of religiosity, I think I became more religious probably like there was a period where I became very like religious. I was never conservative, I would say, but I was religious. But I think I'm still religious, very religious, I would say. I feel at this moment, or I think that religion's purpose is to take care of the least of least of our brothers and sisters. And in my search and in my understanding, I think like that sort of religiosity appeals to me the most, if that makes sense.
It does.
And yeah, and I don't see I necessarily don't see my religion. If you're with that, like one of the scholars in the Muslim world always says this: if you're with that, then I'm with you, because God is with that. And I think that's where I've come to, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I would like for that to be my defining religious identity, if that makes sense. Because I saw over time, and I think this is what Ghazali probably figured when he got up and left, that like at a certain point, even though religion is an exploration for that humility, for that humbleness, for that, right? That like it itself, like the thing that is a cure in itself can become I would say like the disease in a way, or no, that's a strong word, but like it can become like the thing that you are. It can become what you are trying to get away from, if that makes sense.
Right.
And I think that's where I would say like at this moment my religious identity very much is like I'm like I would say probably like if somebody, I mean I'm very like I do all my prayers and I'm very like I'm very pious. I would say that's an olden word, but I'm very pious, I would say. But my piety is not like my piety, I would say, is not connected to. I mean, it's connected to God. That I love God. That I know that for sure. And that's what it's like. But it's not necessarily like. And I love God, and I love the Prophet. But it's not necessarily connected to like. I don't know. I'll just say this. I think I'm with whoever loves God. And whoever loves like, and I think that's what it's come down to at this stage in life. Yeah.
Okay. Fair enough. That was well said. Last question, and you indicated some of this probably, but this is the last question we like to ask on these interviews. In a sentence or two, Arshan, what has religion done to you?
Yeah. I consider myself a religionist. So I went to theology school and divinity school. Religion, I think religion has given me a community. I think I think religion has done a lot for me in terms of that it has given me a mode of like a belonging that I probably didn't have. I don't probably like the way the word religion is defined. All the time. I think in terms of like in terms of like a couple of lines, I think religion has done a lot for me. But also, I would say it's not religion. It's more, in very simple words, like it's not religion as God. And right, and I think that's like, I think that understanding, if that is religion, right, like the God of Abraham is one, and like if that understanding, then I think religion has done a ton for me. If religion, what I feel sometimes it becomes, or that I would say has done a lot for me. But that religion, I don't know if it's like, it's, yeah, this is what I'll say. The religion of God has done a lot for me. or God. Maybe I'll leave the word religion. God has probably done a lot, and that is, and I'm forever grateful for even having the ability to have like that sensibility in my heart or mind that there is something in the unknown, or that faith, or I would like I would like I would like religion to be more dedicated to God. That's what I would say. My final word.
Okay, fair enough. You have the last word, Arshan. Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have been talking with Arshan Khalid. Thank you, Arshan, for giving us your time and sharing how religion has shaped and influenced you and your life. It has been absolutely wonderful.
Thank you, sir. Pleasure.
The podcast series Religion in the American Experience is a project of the National Museum of American Religion. Episodes will be released monthly on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.